Chapter 22. An Indoor Universe. Nikki turned away from Grover's house with her mind whirling. The president's deadline! That's why people were gathered around in the stores. They were waiting to hear his announcement. Why was an old movie on, though? Had they started the war without telling anyone? She glanced at the sky, almost expecting to see bombers streaking overhead. She didn't know what to do. It was true that there was no point in trying to find Grover. Even if she did find him, how could she help? And she certainly couldn't keep a war from happening. Her goal number 3 seemed silly now. How could she possibly do anything to help the messed up world? She was just a kid. She walked down the road, hardly noticing where she was going, staring down at the pavement, kicking now and then at a rock. She thought of Grover, a humming bracelet clapped onto his wrist, fleeing up into the mountains, where probably a dangerous person was hiding out. She thought of Hoyt McCoy, accused by police of something he hadn't done. These things were her fault. Somehow she had done wrong by trying to do right. She trudged on until she came to Raven Road, and there she turned left. She hadn't planned to go this way, her feet just seemed to carry her. When she got to Hoyt McCoy's driveway, her feet stopped. She stared at his no trespassing sign. She gazed up the driveway, past the row of looming trees to the place where the drive curved around toward the house. Part of her wanted to hurry on past, but another part thought she should go in there and tell him she was sorry for what had happened. Was she brave enough? The very thought of it made her stomach shift and her hands get clammy, but she started up the driveway anyhow. She would just knock on his door, apologize very fast, and come away. She was brave enough for that. The house was as dark and silent this time as it had been before. From a distance, she checked the gable window. It was closed. Nothing that looked like a gun or a telescope stuck out of any of the house's windows. This gave her courage. When she got closer, she realized Hoyt's car wasn't there. Good! Now, if she just had a bit of paper and a pencil in her pocket, as she usually did. But behind her she heard the sound of an engine and the crackle of gravel. She turned, and there was Hoyt McCoy in his black car, coming toward her. He'd seen her, of course. She couldn't leave. So she waited, with her heart thudding. "Ah," said Hoyt, getting out of the car. "The other trespasser." Nikki managed to speak. I came to say I'm sorry," she stammered. "About what happened." "You mean the invasion of the Beeson police?" "Yes. Well, it was because I thought you were going to shoot me." "I do not shoot people," said Hoyt. He opened the rear door of the car and took out a battered suitcase. "I may not like people, but I do not shoot them." "I just thought," said Nikki, "that you had a gun, aiming out your window." "And my question for you is this." Hoyt set down the suitcase, put his hands on his hips, and glared at her. "Why were you here, on my property, looking at my windows in the first place?" Nikki had no answer for this question. It was no good to say that she was trying to do the right thing. Deep down, she'd suspected that looking in windows and snooping around people's houses was probably more wrong than right, no matter what the reason for doing it. So she just stood there, staring down at the ground. "But of course, I know why," Hoyt McCoy went on. "Brenda Beeson sent you. Did she send the boy, too?" "What boy?" "The boy who sneaked behind my house a week ago. The boy who was lurking about when those cops tried to snatch me. Skinny boy, hair falling in his face." "Oh, Grover. No, she didn't send him." For a second, the thought of Grover in the woods came to her. She pushed it away. "Well, I have to go now," she said. She'd done what she came to do. "Wait 1 moment," said Hoyt McCoy. Nikki's heart gave a bump. I have just returned from a tense encounter which I believe has had the result I hoped for. That puts me in rather a generous mood. Rare for me." He walked up his front steps and turned to face her. "I'd like to show you," he said, "that a person may be gruff and somewhat on the sloppy side without being a madman or a criminal. But probably you would decline to step inside my house."
"Well, thank you very much," Nikki said, with her heart beating harder. "But I really have to go."
"I thought so," said Hoyt. "A wise choice in general, though in this case unnecessarily cautious. Still, you might be willing just to look in from where you are." He took his keys from his pocket, opened the door, stepped in, and stood to the side, so that Nikki could look past him. She saw a wide hall. On either side was an arched opening that led to a room, and down at the end the hall opened into still another room. Even though it was daytime, all the windows were covered with blinds and curtains. Dim electric light bulbs filled the rooms with a yellowish gloom. Signs of careless housekeeping were everywhere. In the hall, she saw stacks of books on the floor, clothes hanging from doorknobs, a table strewn with loose change and bits of hardware and scraps of paper. From what she could see of the other rooms, they were just as messy. But why was he showing her all this? Shouldn't she turn around and run? She took a few steps backward, but somehow curiosity held her there. "I am not interested," said Hoyt, "in the dull, daily world of chat and tidiness, of keeping up appearances, of being nice and polite and well-groomed. No one who doesn't like my looks or my house need ever come near me, and that will suit me well. My world is the heavens, both by day and by night." He raised a hand and turned slightly. "Watch," he said. Nikki heard the snap of a switch. Instantly the lights in the house went out, leaving a darkness that would have been complete, except for the light from the open front door. Again a bolt of fear shot through her, and she skittered backward a few more steps. Was he going to come out from his strange den and grab her? But a moment later she stood still again, because she saw something happening in the darkness. The walls and the ceiling had begun to glow. Gradually they changed from black to a deep midnight blue, as if they were made of not plaster, but of glass, like a television screen. Tiny points of light appeared, first just a few here and a few there, and then more and more, until the signs of an untidy daily life receded into shadows, and the rooms of Hoyt McCoy's house became star-spangled chambers of night. "The effect is better, of course, if the front door isn't standing wide open," said Hoyt. "You may come in and see if you like, but if you're still afraid of me, I won't insist." Nikki just stood there, staring and speechless. "It took quite a while to customize this house," Hoyt said. "People used to peer over the fence wanting to see how I was remodeling. They were dismayed when the house looked exactly the same after the work was done as before." He laughed, a dry heh. "The heavens are my habitat," he said. "Also my job, though as a rule I do not speak of it." This reminded Nikki of what Grover has said.
"Do you crack open the sky?" she asked.
Hoyt raised his eyebrows. "Who told you that?"
"Grover. He said he saw it."
"Ah, yes, so he did." Hoyt smiled dryly. "He's an observant sort. Most people simply write it off as lightning."
"What is it, then?"
"Not something I choose to speak of at this time," said Hoyt. "I have been extraordinarily busy these last few days, involved in some very delicate, high-level conversations. Right now I am satisfied, but exhausted. Far too exhausted to explain anything." Well, said Nikki, pointing in through the door, all that is really beautiful. It was. It was as if Hoyt's front door had become a porthole to the universe. She longed to step inside and see it up close, have it surround her, as if she were floating in space. But she still didn't feel quite brave enough. If only Hoyt had been like a kindly old uncle, then she would have. But he was so big and rumpled and shaggy and grouchy, she was still afraid of him, though it did begin to seem that she needn't be. Thank you, she said. I love seeing it. Is it the whole universe? Oh, no, said Hoyt. Just a small portion of one universe. Ours. If I had several billion more houses, I might have room for a few other universes as well. Other universes. Nikki thought of her great-grandfather's notes, but she could barely get the idea of one universe into her mind, to say nothing of others. I'd like to see it, she said, but maybe I'll come some other time. Simply ring the bell, said Hoyt. Trespassers are not welcome. Certain selected visitors are. You may include yourself among them. With a brief nod, no smile, he closed the door, and the universe disappeared. Back at Greenhaven, Nikki wandered through the house, too stirred up to settle to anything. She gazed at the ancestors in their gold frames. She ran her fingers along the curves of the banister. She stared at her reflection in the great dining room mirror. Up in the nursery, she rocked in the rocking chair beneath the glow of the lamp, holding Otis on her lap and running her hand from his head to his tail over and over. Around 4:30, when Crystal still wasn't back from wherever she was, she took Otis down for his afternoon outing. To her surprise, there were people on the street, walking as if they had an appointment somewhere. Quickly, she took Otis back upstairs and came down again. As she went out the front door, she saw Martin among the people passing. She ran up to him. What's happening? You didn't hear? Martin looked down his nose at Nikki. There's a meeting. Mrs. Beeson called it. She wants to speak to everyone. It's urgent. You should come. It's at the church. Do you know what it's about? Nikki asked. No, said Martin, but it must be important. He set off down the sidewalk again. You should come, he said again over his shoulder. And your aunt, too. Crystal wouldn't be interested, Nikki was sure of that, but she herself would go, of course. She had to know what the meeting was about. She dashed back into the house to get her jacket. The sun was down now and the temperature was dropping. And then she joined the flow of people moving toward the church.